The notification on my phone lit up while I was pouring my second cup of coffee on a frigid January morning, and I knew immediately it was going to ruin my day. It was from the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association, and the subject line read, "Violation Notice, Immediate Action Required." I lived in what was supposed to be a quiet subdivision in Naperville, Illinois, about 40 minutes outside Chicago, and up until that moment, I thought I had been doing everything right. My name is Henry Winters, and I had moved into this neighborhood 3 years ago with my wife Jennifer after we sold our cramped condo in the city. The house was a beautiful 2-story colonial with a spacious yard, and the neighborhood seemed perfect. The streets were tree-lined, the houses were well-maintained, and everyone seemed friendly enough. What I didn't realize at the time was that the HOA here was run by a woman named Patricia Hendricks, a middle-aged busybody who treated the neighborhood covenants like they were the 10 Commandments handed down from God himself. I opened the email and felt my blood pressure rising with every word I read. According to Patricia, I was being fined $500 for allowing snowdrifts to accumulate in such a way that they blocked the HOA's decorative neighborhood signs at the entrance to my cul-de-sac. The email included photos taken at what appeared to be 6 in the morning, showing the ornate wooden sign that read, "Meadowbrook Hills, a community of distinction," partially obscured by a drift of snow that had blown there naturally during the blizzard we had gotten 2 days prior. I had been incredibly diligent about snow removal. Every single time it snowed, I was out there with my snowblower, clearing my driveway, my sidewalk, and even the sidewalks of my elderly neighbors on either side of me. I took pride in keeping my property immaculate. But apparently, that wasn't enough for Patricia and her band of HOA board members. They expected me to somehow control where the wind deposited snow after a storm. Jennifer walked into the kitchen, still in her bathrobe, and immediately noticed the expression on my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "The HOA is fining us $500 because snow drifts are blocking their precious signs," I said, turning my phone around so she could see the email. She leaned in, reading the message, her eyes widening. "Are they serious? You can't control where the wind blows snow. That's insane." "That's what I'm saying," I replied, feeling the frustration building in my chest. "I've been out there every single time clearing everything, but natural snow drifts, how am I supposed to prevent those?" Jennifer sat down at the kitchen table, shaking her head. "You need to respond to this. There's no way this fine is legitimate." I spent the next hour crafting a carefully worded response explaining that, while I took my property maintenance responsibilities seriously, I could not reasonably be held accountable for natural snow accumulation caused by wind patterns, especially on property that was technically HOA common ground, not my personal property. I pointed out that the signs were located at the entrance to the cul-de-sac, a good 30 feet from my actual property line, and that I had fulfilled all my obligations regarding my driveway and sidewalks. The response came back within 2 hours. Patricia's email was curt and condescending. She informed me that according to Section 12.4.7 of the HOA covenants, homeowners were responsible for ensuring that all common areas adjacent to their properties remain accessible and visible at all times. She claimed that since my house was the closest to the entrance signs, I was responsible for keeping them clear. The fine stood, and I had 30 days to pay or face additional penalties. I called an emergency meeting with my neighbor, Tom Richardson, who lived 2 doors down and had served on the HOA board before Patricia took over. Tom was a reasonable guy in his late 50s who had watched with dismay as Patricia transformed what had been a fairly relaxed HOA into something resembling an authoritarian regime. She's been looking for reasons to fine people left and right, Tom told me as we stood in his garage, both of us nursing beers even though it was barely noon. Last month she fined the Hendersons because their mailbox was half an inch too far from the curb. The month before that, she went after the Martins because their Christmas lights were still up on December 26th. "This is ridiculous," I said. "I've been busting my back keeping everything clean. I even helped the neighbors. And now I'm getting fined for something I literally cannot control." Tom took a sip of his beer and shook his head. "You know what the real problem is? Patricia doesn't actually care about the neighborhood. She cares about power. She likes being able to tell people what to do, and ever since her husband left her last year, it's gotten 10 times worse." "So what do I do?" I asked. "Well, you've got a few options," Tom said. "You can pay the fine and let it go. You can fight it, which means going through the HOA's dispute resolution process, which Patricia also controls. Or—" He paused, a slight grin forming on his face. "Or what?" "Or you can maliciously comply. Give them exactly what they're asking for, but in a way that makes them regret it." I didn't understand what he meant at first, but as Tom explained his thinking, a plan began to form in my mind. If the HOA wanted to hold me responsible for natural snowdrifts, and if they were going to fine me for something completely beyond my control, then maybe I should take a different approach to the entire situation. After all, I had been going above and beyond my actual requirements, plowing and clearing far more than what was technically mandated in the covenants. That evening, I sat down and read through the entire HOA covenant document, all 47 pages of it. I had skimmed it when we bought the house, but I had never really studied it in detail. What I found was interesting. The covenants required homeowners to keep their driveways reasonably clear during winter months and to maintain their sidewalks within a reasonable time frame after snowfall. The language was vague, probably intentionally so, but nowhere did it actually specify exact time frames or methods. More importantly, I discovered that the section Patricia had cited about common areas was much more ambiguous than she had made it sound. The full text read, "Homeowners shall make reasonable efforts to ensure that common areas adjacent to their properties remain accessible and visible at all times, subject to weather conditions and reasonable limitations." That phrase, "subject to weather conditions and reasonable limitations," seemed pretty important. I called a lawyer friend of mine, Marcus Chen, who practiced real estate law in Chicago. After I explained the situation, he laughed. "Henry, this is the most petty HOA nonsense I've heard in months, and trust me, I hear a lot," Marcus said. "But here's the thing. That covenant language is so vague that it's basically unenforceable. What does reasonable efforts mean? What constitutes reasonable limitations?" A judge would laugh this out of court if it ever got that far. "So I shouldn't pay the fine?" I asked. "Oh, you definitely shouldn't pay it," Marcus replied. "But more than that, you should document everything. Every email, every interaction, every time you do any snow removal. Because if they try to put a lien on your house or take any legal action, you're going to want a record of their harassment." "They can put a lien on my house." I felt my stomach drop. "If you don't pay the fines, yes, they can eventually do that. But it takes time, and they have to follow proper procedures. And if you can demonstrate that the fines were unreasonable and that you were in compliance with the actual covenant requirements, you can fight it. Just document everything." The next morning, I sent another email to Patricia, this time with Marcus's guidance. I formally disputed the fine, cited the full text of the covenant including the parts she had conveniently omitted, and requested a hearing before the full HOA board. I kept my tone professional but firm. Her response was even more hostile than before. She accused me of being difficult and unwilling to be a good neighbor. She insisted that the fine was valid and that if I didn't pay within 30 days, it would increase to $750 and further action would be taken. That's when I decided to implement Tom's suggestion. I was going to comply with the covenants, but only the covenants. Nothing more, nothing less. And if that meant letting nature take its course with snowdrifts, then so be it. The next snowfall came 4 days later. It was a moderate snow, about 4 inches, nothing too dramatic. Normally, I would have been out with my snowblower at dawn, clearing everything in sight. Instead, I waited. I waited until almost noon, and then I went out and cleared just my driveway. I made sure to clear only the required path, nothing extra. I didn't touch my neighbor's sidewalks. I didn't clear any excess snow. I certainly didn't go anywhere near the HOA signs at the entrance to the cul-de-sac. Jennifer watched from the window, a concerned expression on her face. When I came back inside, she was waiting by the door. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "I'm tired of being taken advantage of," I said. "I've been doing way more than required and I'm getting fined anyway. So from now on, they get exactly what the covenants require. Nothing more." Within 2 days, I received another email from Patricia. This one was even more aggressive. She was threatening to fine me again, this time for failing to maintain community standards, because I had only cleared my driveway and not the sidewalks. I responded immediately, pointing out that the covenants required sidewalk clearing within a reasonable time frame. And since it had only been 2 days since the snowfall and temperatures had been well below freezing, making the work potentially dangerous, I was still within a reasonable time frame. I then went out and cleared just my sidewalk, the one directly adjacent to my property. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, came out of her house wrapped in a thick winter coat. "Henry, dear, is everything all right? You usually help me with my sidewalk." I felt terrible. Mrs. Peterson was 83 years old and couldn't possibly clear her own snow. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm sorry. I'm having some issues with the HOA right now, and I need to be careful about what I'm doing. But tell you what, I'll help you out. I just need to be strategic about it." I cleared her sidewalk, but I made sure to document that I was doing it as a personal favor, not as part of my HOA obligations. I helped her with her driveway too because I wasn't a monster. But I didn't touch anything else. The HOA signs at the entrance to the cul-de-sac remained buried under a growing drift of snow. A week passed, and the snow drift by the signs grew larger. We got another storm, this one dumping 7 inches overnight. The wind was particularly strong, creating dramatic drifts across the neighborhood. The HOA sign was now almost completely obscured, with only the very top of the wooden post visible above the white mound. I cleared my driveway and my sidewalk, following the letter of the covenant requirements. Nothing more. Patricia showed up at my door 2 days later. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was inside working on my laptop when the doorbell rang. Jennifer answered it, and I heard Patricia's sharp voice from the entryway. "I need to speak with Henry immediately." I walked to the front door, where Patricia stood on my porch, her arms crossed and her face red with anger. She was wearing an expensive-looking wool coat and leather boots, her highlighted blonde hair styled in that particular way that screamed, "I demand to speak to the manager." "Hello, Patricia," I said calmly. "Don't you hello Patricia me," she snapped. "The entrance signs have been completely buried for over a week. People can't even tell they're entering Meadowbrook Hills anymore. This is unacceptable." "I've been maintaining my property according to the covenant requirements," I replied, keeping my voice level. My driveway is clear. My sidewalks are clear. The signs are your responsibility, she practically shouted. Actually, according to Section 12.4.7, which you cited in your original violation notice, I'm required to make reasonable efforts subject to weather conditions and reasonable limitations. I would argue that attempting to control natural snow drift patterns during record snowfall is beyond reasonable limitations. Her face turned an even deeper shade of red. If you don't clear those signs by tomorrow, I'm fining you $1,000. You can try, I said. But I've consulted with a real estate attorney, and he's advised me that your interpretation of the covenants is overly broad and likely unenforceable. If you want to fine me, go ahead. But I'll be fighting it, and I'll be requesting a full board hearing. Patricia's eyes narrowed. You're going to regret this, Henry. I've dealt with difficult homeowners before, and they always lose. Is that a threat? Jennifer asked, stepping forward to stand beside me. It's a promise, Patricia said, then turned and stalked back to her white Mercedes SUV parked in my driveway. After she left, Jennifer turned to me with wide eyes. She's actually insane. Yeah, I'm starting to realize that, I replied. The next day, I received a formal notice of a $1,000 fine. As promised, I immediately submitted a formal dispute and requested a hearing before the full HOA board. According to the bylaws, they had to schedule the hearing within 30 days. In the meantime, the snow kept coming. Naperville was having one of its worst winters in decades. We got hit with storm after storm, and each time the drift by the HOA signs grew larger. It became almost comical. The sign was now buried under what had to be at least 4 feet of snow, a massive white mound that dominated the entrance to the cul-de-sac. Other neighbors started to notice. Some of them asked me what was going on, and I explained the situation. Most of them were sympathetic. A few told me their own horror stories about Patricia's enforcement tactics. The Johnsons told me she had fined them $300 because their grass was 1 inch too tall during a particularly rainy spring when it was impossible to mow. The Davises said she had threatened them with legal action because their exterior house paint had faded slightly, even though the house was only 5 years old. Tom Richardson organized a small coalition of neighbors who were fed up with Patricia's leadership. There were 7 of us in total, all homeowners who had been targeted by her aggressive enforcement tactics. We started meeting weekly at Tom's house to discuss strategies. The problem is that she controls the board, Tom explained during one of our meetings. When I was on the board, we had 5 members and we made decisions democratically. But after I left, Patricia engineered things so that her friends were elected. Now the board is her, Susan Carmichael and Linda Novick, and those 2 agree with everything Patricia says. So how do we change that? Asked Mike Davis, a software engineer who lived on Elm Street. Annual elections are in March, Tom said. That's 2 months away. We need to run our own candidates and vote Patricia and her cronies out. It seemed like a long shot, but it was really our only option if we wanted to create lasting change. In the meantime, I continued my strategy of malicious compliance. I did exactly what the covenants required, nothing more, nothing less. And I documented everything meticulously, taking photos with timestamps every time I cleared snow, every time I performed any maintenance. The HOA board hearing was scheduled for February 14th, Valentine's Day. I found that darkly amusing. Marcus, my attorney friend, agreed to accompany me to the hearing, not as formal legal representation but as moral support and an observer. The hearing was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood pool. Patricia sat at the head of a long table with Susan and Linda flanking her on either side. There were about 15 other residents in attendance, including Jennifer and several members of our informal coalition. Patricia called the hearing to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. Yes, she actually had a gavel. We're here to address the complaint filed by Henry Winters regarding a fine assessed for violation of HOA covenants, Patricia began, her tone formal and cold. Mr. Winters, you have 15 minutes to present your case. I stood up, my prepared notes in hand. Thank you. I'm here to dispute a series of fines that I believe are unreasonable and not supported by the actual language of our HOA covenants. I've been fined a total of $1,500 for allegedly failing to clear snowdrifts from around the neighborhood entrance signs. However, these signs are located on HOA common property, not my personal property, and are subject to natural wind patterns that I cannot control. I proceeded to walk through my argument, citing the specific covenant language and pointing out the phrases about reasonable efforts and reasonable limitations. I showed photos documenting all the snow removal I had performed on my own property. I even presented weather data showing that the winter had been historically severe, with snowfall totals 30% above the 30-year average. Patricia listened with a stony expression, occasionally whispering to Susan and Linda. When I finished, she didn't even pause before responding. Your interpretation of the covenants is self-serving and incorrect, she said flatly. The board has determined that your responsibility includes managing snow accumulation near the entrance signs since your property is closest to that location. The fines stand, and if you don't pay within 14 days, we'll be placing a lien on your property. Wait a minute, Marcus spoke up from his seat. I'm Marcus Chen. I'm a real estate attorney. I'm not here in an official capacity, but I feel compelled to point out that the covenant language Mr. Winters cited is actually quite clear. The phrase subject to reasonable limitations is key legal language that limits the scope of homeowner responsibility. Additionally, holding a homeowner responsible for common property maintenance sets a very concerning precedent. Patricia's eyes flashed with anger. This is a board hearing for homeowners, not a legal proceeding. Your input is not required or welcome. Actually, Tom Richardson stood up. The bylaws allow any resident to speak at board hearings. Marcus lives in the neighborhood on Birch Lane, so he has every right to comment. Patricia looked like she wanted to explode, but she managed to control herself. Fine. Does anyone else have comments? Several hands went up. One by one, neighbors stood and spoke. Most of them supported my position, sharing their own stories of what they felt were unreasonable fines and aggressive enforcement. A few sided with Patricia, arguing that maintaining property values required strict adherence to standards. The hearing lasted almost 2 hours. Finally, Patricia called for a board vote. Unsurprisingly, all 3 board members voted to uphold the fines. The fines are upheld, Patricia announced with what I could swear was a satisfied expression. Mr. Winters, you have 14 days to pay the full amount of $1,500, or we will proceed with placing a lien on your property. As everyone filed out of the clubhouse, several neighbors came up to offer their support and commiseration. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. Don't worry, he said. We're going to vote her out in March, just hang in there. But I wasn't sure I could wait until March. $1,500 was a lot of money to pay for something I hadn't actually done wrong, but the thought of having a lien placed on my house was even worse. That night, Jennifer and I stayed up late discussing our options. Maybe we should just pay it, Jennifer said, though I could tell she hated the idea. It's not worth the stress. It's the principle, I replied. If we pay, we're admitting she's right, And then what? Next time it snows, she'll expect me to somehow control the weather. Where does it end? Jennifer sighed. I know, I just hate seeing you so stressed about this. I reached across the table and took her hand. I appreciate that, but I think we need to see this through. Marcus said the fines are questionable legally. Maybe we can fight the lien. The next snowstorm hit 3 days later, and it was a monster. 14 inches fell overnight, with winds gusting up to 40 miles per hour. The entire neighborhood was buried. Snowdrifts reached 4 and 5 feet in places. The entrance to the cul-de-sac was completely impassable, with the HOA sign buried under what must have been 6 feet of snow. You couldn't even see where the sign had been. It was just one massive white mound. I cleared my driveway and sidewalk, a task that took me nearly 3 hours with my snowblower. By the time I was done, I was exhausted and my back was killing me. But I had fulfilled my covenant obligations. The city snowplows came through that afternoon, clearing the main roads but pushing enormous piles of snow onto the sides of streets, making the entrance situation even worse. The entire entrance to Meadowbrook Hills was now blocked by a wall of snow. Delivery trucks couldn't find the neighborhood. The mail carrier got confused and skipped several houses. Emergency vehicles would have had serious trouble finding addresses. My phone started ringing that evening. It was Patricia. "Henry, you need to clear the entrance immediately," she demanded without preamble. "No, Patricia, I don't," I replied calmly. "That's HOA common property. If you want it cleared, the HOA needs to hire a snow removal service. We're not paying for snow removal when we have homeowners who are responsible for it. Show me in the covenants where it says homeowners have to clear HOA common property at their own expense," I said. "Because I've read the entire document multiple times and I can't find it anywhere." She hung up on me. The next morning, I woke up to find that someone had left a note on my door. It was printed in large, angry capital letters, "Clear the entrance or else." I took a photo of the note and saved it to my growing documentation file. Then, I called the Naperville Police Department's non-emergency line to report the threatening message. An officer came by that afternoon, a young guy named Officer Martinez who looked like he was in his late 20s. He took a report and examined the note. "To be honest, sir, this is pretty mild as far as threatening messages go," he said. "But I'll file a report so you have documentation." "You said you're having issues with your HOA." I explained the entire situation. Officer Martinez shook his head sympathetically. "My parents dealt with an awful HOA when I was growing up," he said. "They can make your life miserable. Just keep documenting everything, and if you get any more threatening messages, call us right away." The entrance to Meadowbrook Hills remained buried for 5 more days. Finally, Patricia must have realized that I wasn't going to cave, because an industrial snow removal company showed up and cleared the entrance and the area around the signs. I later learned from Tom that Patricia had tried to bill the cost to me directly, but the HOA's property management company had informed her that wasn't legally possible. February turned into March, and the annual HOA election approached. Tom and his coalition had recruited 3 candidates to run for the board positions. Tom himself, Mike Davis, and a woman named Rachel Foster, who had been fined by Patricia for having the wrong shade of shutters on her house. The election was conducted by mail-in ballot, with all homeowners receiving their ballots in mid-March. The votes would be counted at the annual HOA meeting on March 28th. In the meantime, I still hadn't paid the $1,500 in fines, and Patricia had made good on her threat to initiate lien proceedings. I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney informing me that a lien would be placed on my property. unless I paid the outstanding fines plus an additional $500 in legal fees within 30 days. Marcus reviewed the letter and shook his head. This is aggressive, but it's within their rights under Illinois HOA law. However, I think we can fight it. The problem is, fighting it will cost you more in legal fees than just paying the fines. I don't care, I said. This is about more than money now. This is about holding Patricia accountable for her abuse of power. Marcus agreed to represent me formally, though he gave me a substantial discount on his rates since we were friends. We filed a formal legal challenge to the lien, arguing that the underlying fines were not valid because they were based on an unreasonable interpretation of the covenant language. The week before the annual HOA meeting, something unexpected happened. I received a call from a reporter at the Naperville Sun, the local newspaper. "Mr. Winters, my name is David Keegan, and I'm a reporter covering community news. I've heard about your dispute with your HOA, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk about it. Several other homeowners have reached out to me with similar complaints about HOA overreach in Naperville." I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to escalate things further, but another part of me thought that public attention might actually help. "Sure," I said. "I'll talk to you." David came to my house the next day with a photographer. We spent an hour discussing the situation, and he took photos of the emails and documentation I had collected. He also interviewed several other neighbors, including Tom Richardson and the Davises. The article ran 3 days before the annual meeting, with the headline "Naperville HOA's Aggressive Enforcement Tactics Under Fire." It detailed not just my situation, but several other cases of what the reporter termed questionable fines and heavy-handed enforcement in Meadowbrook Hills. The article included responses from Patricia, who defended her actions as necessary to maintain property values and community standards. The article went semi-viral on social media, at least locally. The Naperville Community Facebook group exploded with comments, most of them critical of Patricia and the HOA board. Some people shared their own HOA horror stories. Others debated whether HOAs served any useful purpose at all. I wasn't sure if the publicity would help or hurt, but at least people were paying attention. The annual HOA meeting took place in the gymnasium of a nearby elementary school, since the community clubhouse wasn't large enough for the expected crowd. Normally, annual HOA meetings drew maybe 20 or 30 residents. This year, over 150 people showed up. Patricia looked furious as she called the meeting to order. The first order of business was the presentation of the annual budget and financial reports, which she rushed through as quickly as possible. Then came the election results. An independent accounting firm had been hired to count the ballots. The accountant, a middle-aged man in a suit who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, stepped up to the microphone. "For the position of president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA," he began, "Tom Richardson received 312 votes. Patricia Hendricks received 187 votes. Tom Richardson is elected." The gymnasium erupted in applause. Patricia's face turned white, then red. She looked like she was about to say something, but Tom was already walking up to take his position at the front table. The accountant continued. "For the position of vice president, Mike Davis received 298 votes. Susan Carmichael received 193 votes. Mike Davis is elected." More applause. Susan looked shocked. "And for the position of secretary, Rachel Foster received 301 votes. Linda Novick received 190 votes. Rachel Foster is elected." The entire board had been voted out. Patricia stood up abruptly, grabbed her papers, and walked out of the gymnasium without a word. Susan and Linda followed her, looking shell-shocked. Tom took the microphone. "Thank you, everyone, for your trust and your votes. I promise we're going to run this HOA the way it should be run, fairly, transparently, and with respect for all homeowners. Our first order of business will be reviewing all outstanding fines and disputes to ensure they are reasonable and in line with the actual covenant requirements." The applause was thunderous. After the meeting, dozens of people came up to congratulate Tom and the new board members. Several people thanked me for standing up to Patricia, though I felt a bit embarrassed by the attention. Jennifer squeezed my hand and smiled. "You did it," she said. "We all did it," I replied. The new board held its first official meeting a week later. True to his word, Tom's first agenda item was reviewing all outstanding fines and disputes. My case was at the top of the list. After reviewing all my documentation, the emails, the photos, and the covenant language, the board voted unanimously to rescind all fines against me. They also voted to issue a formal apology and to reimburse me for the legal fees I had incurred. The previous board's interpretation of the covenants was overly broad and unreasonable, Tom announced. "We're also going to be revising our enforcement procedures to ensure that fines are only issued for clear, unambiguous violations, and that all homeowners are treated fairly and given adequate opportunity to respond before fines are assessed." Over the next few months, the new board made significant changes to how the HOA operated. They instituted more transparent budgeting processes. They created an independent review committee to hear disputes before fines were finalized. They hired a professional snow removal service to handle the common areas during winter, funded by a modest increase in HOA dues that most homeowners supported. Most significantly, they revised the covenant enforcement policies to focus on significant issues that actually affected property values and neighborhood safety, rather than petty violations of minor aesthetic rules. Patricia disappeared from neighborhood activities entirely. I saw her occasionally, pulling out of her driveway in her white Mercedes, but she never made eye contact or acknowledged anyone. Rumor had it she was planning to sell her house and move to a different neighborhood, preferably one where she could regain some position of authority. About 6 months after the election, Jennifer and I were sitting on our back deck on a warm Saturday afternoon in September. The ordeal with the HOA felt like a distant memory. The neighborhood had settled into a much more pleasant rhythm under Tom's leadership. People were friendlier. There were fewer complaints and more community events. "You know what's funny?" Jennifer said, sipping her iced tea. "When we first moved here, I thought having an HOA would be a good thing, someone to make sure the neighborhood stayed nice. And now?" I asked. "Now I realize that it's not about the HOA itself, it's about the people running it. An HOA can be fine if the people in charge are reasonable and fair, but if they're not..." She trailed off. "It becomes a nightmare," I finished. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, enjoying the late summer evening. Our yard looked beautiful. I had been spending more time on it now that I wasn't constantly stressed about HOA violations. The flower beds Jennifer had planted were blooming with colors, and the lawn was thick and green. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus. "Hey, thought you'd want to know. Patricia Hendricks just closed on the sale of her house. She's officially moving out of Meadowbrook Hills. Guess she couldn't handle not being in charge anymore." I showed the message to Jennifer, who laughed. "Good riddance," she said. I couldn't help but agree. The following winter was much less eventful. When the first major snowstorm hit in December, I was back to my old routine of clearing not just my property, but helping out my elderly neighbors as well. The difference was that now I was doing it because I wanted to, not because I was afraid of being fined. And when snowdrifts inevitably buried the HOA entrance signs again, the professional snow removal service the HOA had hired took care of it within 24 hours. No drama, no fines, no threatening emails. Tom proved to be an excellent HOA president. He ran the board meetings efficiently but democratically. He listened to homeowner concerns. He enforced the covenants when necessary, but with common sense and proportionality. Under his leadership, the neighborhood actually became the community of distinction that the entrance sign claimed it to be. One evening in late January, almost exactly a year after the whole ordeal had started, Tom knocked on my door. He was holding a bottle of wine. "I wanted to thank you," he said when I invited him in. "Thank me for what?" I asked. "For standing up to Patricia. If you hadn't fought back, if you had just paid those ridiculous fines, the rest of us might never have found the courage to challenge her. You showed us that we didn't have to just accept her tyranny." I felt a bit embarrassed. I was just defending myself. "Maybe," Tom said, "but sometimes that's exactly what it takes to spark change. One person who's willing to say, no, this isn't right." We opened the wine and sat in my living room, talking about the neighborhood and how much things had improved. Jennifer joined us, and eventually Tom's wife, Carol, came over too. It turned into an impromptu gathering, a celebration of sorts, though we didn't explicitly label it as such. As I sat there, surrounded by friends and neighbors in a house I loved in a neighborhood that was finally functioning the way it should, I reflected on the whole experience. Had it been stressful? Absolutely. Had there been moments when I wanted to just give up and pay the fines? Definitely. But I was glad I hadn't. Standing up to an abusive HOA had cost me time, energy, and even some money in legal fees, despite the eventual reimbursement. But it had been worth it. Not just for me, but for all the other homeowners who had been suffering under Patricia's authoritarian rule. The next morning, I woke up to find that another snowstorm had moved through overnight. About 6 inches of fresh powder covered everything. I got dressed, started up my snowblower and headed outside. As I cleared my driveway, I saw Mrs. Peterson peek out her window. I waved at her and gestured toward her driveway. She smiled and gave me a thumbs up. After finishing my own property, I spent another 30 minutes clearing hers. Mike Davis, who lived 2 houses down, was out clearing his driveway too. We waved at each other and he called out, "Thanks for everything, Henry." I wasn't entirely sure what he was thanking me for, but I appreciated the sentiment. By mid-morning, the entire cul-de-sac was cleared, with various neighbors helping each other out. It was how a community was supposed to function. People helping people, not because they were forced to by unreasonable rules and threats of fines, but because it was the right thing to do. I checked the entrance to the neighborhood on my way to run errands that afternoon. The HOA signs were clearly visible, the snow around them neatly cleared by the professional service. Everything looked perfect, exactly the way an HOA entrance should look. The difference was that this time, no one person had been threatened or fined to make it happen. The HOA had done its job properly, using community resources to maintain community property. It was such a simple concept, yet under Patricia's reign, it had somehow become completely twisted. As I drove past the signs that read, "Meadowbrook Hills, a community of distinction," I felt a sense of satisfaction. Maybe we actually were a community of distinction now. Not because we had the most perfectly maintained signs or the most aggressive enforcement of petty rules, but because we had learned to work together, to treat each other with respect, and to stand up against unreasonable authority when necessary. Several months later, in early spring, I attended a HOA board meeting where Tom announced that the neighborhood had been recognized by the city of Naperville for community excellence. The award cited our high homeowner participation rates in community events, our collaborative approach to neighborhood maintenance, and our innovative dispute resolution procedures. It was ironic in a way. Under Patricia's authoritarian leadership, when she was obsessed with rules and fines and maintaining her vision of perfection, the neighborhood had been miserable despite looking good on the surface. Now, under Tom's more relaxed and democratic leadership, the neighborhood was not only happier but also actually functioning better by any objective measure. Property values had increased. Crime was virtually non-existent. Community events were well attended. People actually liked living here. After the meeting, several of the newer residents who had moved in after Patricia left came up to me. One of them, a young couple named the Martins, thanked me for creating such a welcoming neighborhood. "We almost bought in a different subdivision, Mrs. Martin said, but everyone we talked to said Meadowbrook Hills was the best. They said the HOA here actually cares about the residents." I didn't have the heart to tell her how different things had been just a year and a half earlier. Instead, I just smiled and welcomed them to the neighborhood. That summer, Jennifer and I celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. We hosted a backyard party, inviting neighbors and friends. As I stood at the grill, flipping burgers and watching Jennifer laugh with Carol and Rachel and other neighborhood women, I felt deeply content. Tom came up beside me, beer in hand. "Beautiful day," he said. "It really is," I agreed. "You ever think about running for the board yourself?" he asked. "We could use someone with your backbone." I laughed. "No thanks, I've had enough HOA drama to last a lifetime. I'm happy to just be a regular homeowner who mows his lawn and clears his snow and minds his own business." "Fair enough," Tom said, clinking his beer bottle against mine. "But if you ever change your mind, the offer stands." As the party continued into the evening, with kids playing in the yard and adults chatting around the patio table, I reflected on how much had changed. The Snowdrift saga seemed almost absurd now, like something that had happened to someone else. But it had been real, and it had taught me important lessons. I had learned that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it's difficult and uncomfortable. I had learned that unreasonable authority can only persist if good people remain silent. I had learned that communities function best when they're built on mutual respect and cooperation, not fear and punishment. Most importantly, I had learned that change is possible. When Patricia had seemed all-powerful, when those fines had seemed inevitable, when the lien on my house had seemed like a foregone conclusion, it had felt hopeless. But by standing firm, by documenting everything, by finding allies and building a coalition, we had changed everything. The HOA that had once been a source of stress and anxiety was now just a mundane administrative reality, handling the boring but necessary tasks of maintaining common property and enforcing reasonable standards, which is exactly what an HOA should be. As autumn approached and the leaves began to change colors, I found myself almost looking forward to winter. Not because I enjoyed shoveling snow, but because I knew that this time, when the storms came, I could handle them without fear. I could clear my driveway, help my neighbors, and let nature take its course with the snowdrifts, confident that no one would be sending me threatening emails or assessing ridiculous fines. The first snow of the season came in late November, a light dusting that barely covered the grass. I cleared my driveway in about 20 minutes, more out of habit than necessity. The entrance signs remained clearly visible. When the first major storm hit in December, dropping 10 inches overnight, the new system worked perfectly. I cleared my property in the morning. The HOA's snow removal service cleared the common areas by afternoon. No drama, no conflict, no stress. Mrs. Peterson waved at me from her window as I finished clearing her driveway, and I waved back. It was such a simple thing, helping an elderly neighbor, but it filled me with satisfaction in a way that all my previous stress and conflict never could. That evening, as Jennifer and I sat by the fireplace with mugs of hot chocolate, she asked me if I had any regrets about how I had handled the situation with Patricia. I thought about it for a moment. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret any of it. Was it stressful? Yes. Did it consume a lot of time and energy? Absolutely. But it needed to be done. If I had just paid those fines and accepted her interpretation of the rules, it would have set a terrible precedent. And who knows how many other people she would have targeted." Jennifer nodded. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I know it wasn't easy, but you did the right thing." As winter progressed, life in Meadowbrook Hills continued peacefully. The snow came and went. The professional service kept the common areas clear. Neighbors helped each other out with the spirit of genuine community rather than fear of fines. It was everything a neighborhood should be. In February, Tom announced at a board meeting that Patricia had sent a letter to the HOA from her new neighborhood in a different suburb. In the letter, she criticized the new board's lax enforcement and predicted that property values would decline without stricter oversight. Tom read the letter aloud, and the assembled homeowners responded with laughter and rolled eyes. No one took her prediction seriously. Property values had actually increased under the new management, and the neighborhood had never been more harmonious. "Should we respond?" Rachel asked. "No," Tom said, folding the letter. "I think we'll just file this and move on. We've got better things to do than engage with someone who's no longer part of this community." Everyone agreed. As spring arrived and the last of the winter snow melted away, I took stock of everything that had happened. What had started as a simple dispute over snowdrifts had mushroomed into a neighborhood-wide movement that had transformed the entire character of our HOA. It was amazing how one unreasonable fine had sparked such significant change. I thought about all the homeowners across America who were probably dealing with similar situations right now, facing down petty tyrants on their HOA boards, receiving ridiculous fines for minor or imaginary violations. I hoped some of them would find the courage to fight back, to stand up for themselves, to document everything and build coalitions and vote out the bad actors. Because HOAs don't have to be nightmarish. They can serve useful purposes, maintaining common property and enforcing reasonable standards that protect everyone's investment. But they can only do that when they are run by reasonable people who remember that their job is to serve the community, not to rule it. The snowdrift that had buried those entrance signs had also buried Patricia's reign of terror. And when the snow melted, what remained was a healthier, happier community. Jennifer started planting her spring flowers in early April. I helped her dig the beds and spread mulch, enjoying the physical work and the warm sunshine. Our yard was going to look beautiful this year. As I worked, I noticed several other neighbors doing similar work in their yards. Everyone took pride in their properties, not because they feared fines, but because they genuinely cared about their homes and their neighborhood. That intrinsic motivation was so much more powerful than any external threat could ever be. Tom walked by during his evening jog and stopped to chat. "The new fiscal year is going well," he told me. "We're actually under budget in enforcement costs because we're not spending thousands of dollars on legal fees for petty disputes." "Makes sense," I said. "Turns out it's cheaper to be reasonable." Tom laughed. "Who would have thought?" As he jogged away, I reflected on that simple truth. Being reasonable, treating people with respect, enforcing rules proportionally, it wasn't just the right thing to do morally, it was also more efficient and effective practically. Patricia's authoritarian approach hadn't just been wrong, it had been counterproductive. Summer arrived with long, lazy days and neighborhood barbecues. The community pool opened for the season, and families gathered there on weekends. Kids played in the water while adults chatted in the shade. It felt like a real community, not just a collection of houses governed by arbitrary rules. One Saturday in July, the HOA organized a neighborhood block party. The entire cul-de-sac was closed off, and tables were set up in the street. Everyone brought food to share. There was music and games and laughter. At one point, Tom stood up to make a brief speech. "I just want to thank everyone for making Meadowbrook Hills the kind of place where people actually want to live," he said. "We've come a long way in the past year and a half, and it's because all of you have been willing to work together, to help each other out, and to treat each other with respect. This is what community is supposed to look like." Everyone applauded, and the party continued late into the evening. As Jennifer and I walked home that night, our hands intertwined, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. We had faced a challenge, we had stood up for what was right, and we had helped create something better. The entrance signs to Meadowbrook Hills, those signs that had caused so much conflict, now stood as a symbol of something different. They represented a community that had learned to govern itself fairly, that had rejected petty tyranny in favor of democratic cooperation, that had proven that people could live together harmoniously without oppressive enforcement. As another winter approached, I found myself actually looking forward to the snow. Not because I enjoyed the cold or the work of clearing it, but because I knew that this year, when those inevitable drifts formed around the entrance signs, no one would be sending me threatening emails. The snow would come, the service would clear it, and life would go on peacefully. And that, more than anything else, was worth fighting for. The story of the Snowdrifts and the HOA had become something of a legend in our neighborhood. New residents heard about it from their neighbors, usually with a sense of amusement and relief that those days were behind us. It served as a reminder of why good governance mattered, why democratic participation was important, and why ordinary people needed to be willing to stand up against unreasonable authority. Sometimes, late at night, I would remember that first email from Patricia, the one that had started everything. The notification lighting up my phone screen while I drank my morning coffee, the subject line reading "Violation Notice, Immediate Action Required." At the time, it had felt like a disaster. Now, I could see it for what it really was, an opportunity to stand up for myself, an opportunity to help create change, an opportunity to make my community better for everyone. The Snowdrifts had buried more than just HOA signs. They had buried an entire toxic approach to neighborhood governance. And when spring came and the snow melted, what grew in its place was something far better than what had been there before.